So thanks. For options beyond traditional game development, wanted to get into this topic that's near and dear to me, and just a little bit about myself. I work at Level X Incorporated, and I'm a host of the Game Dev Advice podcast. So the credentials page, 30 years in the industry. Hard to believe that now that I think back, but it was 1989 when I started working at the TurboGrafx 16 as a hotline phone rep. Been at 10 different game studios over the years and worked on some of the titles. Big ones, probably heard of maybe, likely Mortal Kombat, Deadly Alliance, Deception, Armageddon, and about half of MK vs. DC Universe. Worked on a Beavis and Butthead PC game, Marvel Avengers Initiative on mobile, a bunch of other things on PC, Facebook, mobile, and lots of console. And I'm now as I mentioned, director of talent acquisition at Level X. 2015, I was talked into by a media consultant to do a Reddit. So I did that. It was kind of fun. And I was excited this year to be named as part of Tim Schafer, Gabe Newell, people like that. So it was exciting. Here's some pictures and things just to show a little bit about my background. So what is traditional game development? Just so we have a context, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what I'm talking about, but just to be extra sure, console games, handheld games, PC games, mobile games, all intended for a general kind of consumer audience. So it's kind of like those games, when you think back, what got you interested in the industry? What was that game? Maybe it was StarCraft 2 or maybe Halo or, for myself, Spy Hunter, right? It was that game that really hooked you and got you interested in the industry. So that's kind of what you think as traditional games, and they're obviously out there and doing well. This talk is not going to be about, though, focusing in that space. I've got plenty of ideas around that and discuss some of them on my podcast, but not for today. So I'm not going to be able to help with getting that art job. Say you have a that genius idea for a game, or you want to make money with your indie game. This is areas we're not going to cover today, and there's other areas people that can do that. It will be about, though, say you work in traditional game development, and maybe you're concerned about burnout or crunch. I know it's gotten press. It's been going on forever. I think it's getting better than it used to be, but it's out there, and normally outside of traditional game development, that's less of a factor. So maybe you're just curious or thinking more about a career outside of that space. Or you just finished school. So let's say you got your CS degree, maybe you got a portfolio together, and you're kind of getting the lay of the land, saying, hey, where can I go? Where can I apply these skills, this trade that I've learned? Possibly somewhere in between. Maybe you're a year or two out of school, got that first job on your belt, and you're thinking, hey, what else is out there? So this is going to be about looking beyond traditional, looking beyond the obvious, the things that and think about when you think game development. Here's a meme from Mr. Robot. So it's just about the idea of just, looking beyond what your thoughts are of game development to all these other avenues. So there are other worlds out there, and there's all different kinds of verticals and business models and different things in the non-traditional gaming space. Here's some of the categories I'm going to be diving into deeper and talking more about during this presentation. ArcViz. This is kind of like what it sounds. It's taking a design and just visualizing it in a way that a client will better understand what they receive, primarily around buildings. So the output or the format can be varied. It can be photorealistic, animation, 3D, and often more and more frequently in XR. And I wanted to, I found this great little slide about what XR is, because sometimes people say AR/VR. but then you're missing MR, and XR is kind of that all-encompassing format to describe, the different genres within extended reality. So VR, it's your typical what you think HTC Vive, Oculus, things like that. Uh, AR is your augmented reality, like your Pokemon Go, probably the best example there. And mixed reality, best one for that I would say is the Magic Leap, which is a interesting piece of hardware with some cool potential. So all of these types of formats are used in this space for ArcViz, and it's a growing field. Hiring is, as you would guess, is primarily for artists. So I took a screenshot here of all the different types of roles that are open, and you can see art direction, UI, lots of 3D. So there's all these different jobs in that space, and got inside information from Ringling that that's one of their biggest industries for people coming out of school. So if you're in the art space and you're looking beyond traditional game development, this is one of them. Immersive learning and training. Excuse me. So it's primarily in corporate, medical, and workforce. Um, when you think of training, normally it's been kind of like PowerPoint type slides with clicking, maybe for compliance training or things like that. But now it's branching out. It's getting bigger. It's getting more visual. It's getting more interactive. Um, Often it's XR based. A big example is the Walmart initiative, and they're using XR to train 17,000 associates. And soft skills, those can be easier to watch and visualize than, say, clicking with a mouse and answering a question or watching a short video. So, this space is growing, and again, a lot of it's being fueled by XR. Here's some example companies. So this StyVR and STIVR and 360 Immersive are some of the companies. And as you can see from job openings, it's a lot of the traditional game development roles. So there's Unity 3D programmers and UI, UX, of course, 3D modelers. I'm sure there's designers too. And this is an area that I see more and more potential with growth. And if Walmart's doing it, then obviously there's some research and some money behind it. So yeah, it's growing. Simulation space is big. There's lots of verticals in that. I'm just going to kind of tap into the medical one, here at the beginning. And this is really geared, as you would guess, towards medical professionals. And it's about visualization and figuring out ways to get those better patient results, better patient outcomes. There's a couple hundred of these location-based simulation labs, and they're throughout the country. There's one down in Peoria. Got a screenshot here from Jump Simulations, which is the Peoria one, and it kind of recreates that environment. So they're replicating what the surgeons go through, so they can practice in this environment and get better at their skills. Other times they may be based at the hospital or where the practice is. So the games or the training will be based on location, and they don't have to travel to these spaces. A couple companies in the space. There's a really exciting one in Germany called Brain Lab, and they do a lot in the neuro space, neurology, brain surgery, and visualization, all those kind of things. HeartFlow is another one. As you would guess, has to deal with cardiologists. And they're hiring. So I took some screenshots. You can see HeartFlow has a VP role there, and Brain Lab has tons of roles. And it's, heavily in engineering, also in art, project management, all those kind of things. And they're based out of Munich, Germany, but they have companies all over the world, and they do a lot of cool stuff. Also along the lines of simulation, it gets a little controversial, but military. So, and it's part of this really broader, big top level genre, which is modeling, simulation, and training. And in that overarching genre, military is one of the biggest customers, and it's 3 to 10 billion a year. Um, and the contracts are huge, and the money's being spent by the companies in the hardware side, so the Lockheeds and Northrops, things like that. Organizations are involved with it that help out in that space, and it's a lot of it's concentrated in the Orlando, Florida area, which is kind of interesting. And again, it's not for everyone, but there is a lot of cool tech and a lot of interesting stuff that goes on in that space. Also, in the little bit in the controversial space is the military games. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the U.S. Army game, America's Army, and that came out 17 years ago. It was initially on the PC. Had to have a pretty high end video card to run it, and yeah, it's really evolved over the years. It's 17 years going, and it's on all the consoles. Um, they use Unreal Engine, so all those type of roles that are based for gaming using Unreal would be applicable here. Designers, programmers, project managers, and again, if this can be controversial, but I'm just here to kind of show what the options are and not make judgment and let people decide on their own. There's also these niches within the simulation. So things you would never think of, but they're out there, and they tend to be pretty heavy on the engineering side. A lot of math, a lot of simulation, a lot of calculations, and trying to do predictive work. But oil and gas is one of them. And as you can guess, they want to take all this data and make smarter decisions. When they're drilling and fracking or whatever they're doing in terms of the oil extraction. So as you can see, there's a bunch of roles that are open in that space. It's not surprisingly heavy in the Texas area, and not sure about overseas, but yeah, it's a interesting smaller vertical that just kind of gets into using all those math and simulation skills in a different way if you're an engineer. Same thing, weather and climate modeling. There's an industry for that. And you think about all the craziness going on with our climates now, and being able to predict that and run simulations and use it across all kinds of different applications. And again, it's heavily on the engineering side. And here are some examples. Another one, gambling. Full disclosure, I worked in the gambling industry for about 1.5 years and did some slot machines, did a couple Prices Right slot machines, and learned a lot. It's huge. I was shocked by this number, and again, this is global in its prediction, but 450 billion with a B dollars. When you think of casinos, the first thing that comes to mind is Vegas, right? Traditional location based. So slot machines kind of fall into two genres, or two platforms, I should say. There's the kind of classic, they call them mechs, mechanical. So you have the 3 reels, 4 or 5, and it's what you think of for the old school kind of one-arm bandit. They spin. Maybe they have some graphics that overlay on top of it, but there are physical reels that are spinning in there. The other is the video, and that's when the screen actually simulates the reels. So all kinds of things you can do in that case, with lots of bang ups and big wins and special effects and sounds. And yeah, they can be really elaborate. The Price is Right game I worked on, we had video monitors with models from the show, and there was Showcase Showdown, and there was 4 of them lined up with lights overhead. So when you won, the lights were flashing on you, kind of like a TV show, and it was like a whole environment. So it's not the blue hair one-arm bandit that you think of, right? So there's or maybe you see at the location-based areas around restaurants and gas stations and bars and things. Those are kind of the baseline ones, but there are the more elaborate games that are out there. A lot of them are Unity-based. All the roles that you would think of: 3D art, UI, animation, design, programming. Mathematicians is an interesting one, because at the end of the day, that pie has to equal 100%. So however you divide up your base games and your big wins and all those things, they need to equal 100%. And then the RTP, return to player, needs to be set below 100%. Because if the machine is paying out over 100%, you have a problem. And that's not something you want to do. So a mathematician will work very closely with game design to figure out how to get that to work. Lots of companies in this space, as you would guess, primarily based in Vegas, Chicago area. Listed some of them below here with Scientific, IGT, Bally, Aristocrats. Actually, they're based on Australia. Credible Technologies got into this about 5-10 years ago. Normally known for Golden Tee Golf. But besides land-based, there's online casinos, and that hasn't really taken off here in the States, at least, because of legislation. And I think it's about figuring out how everyone gets their cut before it goes legal between the casinos and the government and things. But it is more prevalent overseas, and they're estimating 40 billion with that. You have all those different kind of roles. You're not going to be pushing the boundaries as much with in terms of graphics and things, because it's an online platform and you have to be throttled with bandwidth and dealing with those kind of things. But yeah, there are roles in those traditional game spaces. And there are companies in the space, NetEnt and Paraplay. They kind of build these online casino platforms that casinos then license from them to build games. And again, it's more overseas. I think it's just a matter of time until it gets more into the U.S. space. Hardware companies, right? So all of those game consoles, they need people working for them, doing different roles than making a traditional game. And obviously, you can work for Microsoft and work on Forza or things, but there are other roles. So, I got examples here with screens talking about different jobs. I have friends at all three companies, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, and they all came from traditional console gaming and now work there. So there's a lot of opportunities there for your console platforms in addition to your XR platforms. So, Magic Leap down in Florida, you can see, audio, tech, game design, different roles like that, QA, lots of programming. They've got roles open. Obviously, Facebook Oculus is in this, HTC Vive to some degree, and Microsoft also with the HoloLens 2. But it's not just about hardware. There's also the software. So all those tools you use to make games need people working on the tools. So, you think about the game engines. Unity Technologies is huge, right? I started working with them in, it was around 2010. We were working on Marvel Avengers Initiative, and it was a much, much smaller organization. They were based in, I believe it was Copenhagen. We were doing those Skype calls. And now they're all over the world, multiple offices in San Francisco. I know people up in Montreal working with them. And they've, they have all kinds of roles, more engineering than art, but there are roles to help build and support new features, fix bugs, all those kind of things. Same with Epic. We all know Epic Games down in North Carolina there. And I have a friend that works in that space too as an artist. He's an artist evangelist, and he's helping going on site and working with developers to make better games using their engine. 3D modeling. It's now kind of a one-horse race with Autodesk, who's up in Canada. They've kind of dominated, and they now own Maya and 3D Max. And for those of you who don't know, it used to be kind of a holy war. 10, 15 years back, it was kind of like Mac versus Windows, right? It was, you're the one camp or the other, and they hated each other. But now it's all part of the same company. And it seems like Maya's pretty much won that race, at least in terms of the on the game side and the tools there. But games is only a small percentage of their market. All the stuff like the auto industry and all these other areas. I think I've heard somewhere that only 10% of the revenue for Autodesk comes from the game industry. 90% comes outside. So there's a lot of options in that space. And then there's other tools, digital sculpting and painting, ZBrush, Adobe Substance Painter. These people have jobs. They have these companies have openings. So I got some screens here. Engineering roles, UI, things like that. Here's a big one: digital health. So, you think about a market where things just are growing and are going to continue to grow. I found this Business Insider slide kind of talks about, from a very high level, all the different verticals and like all the different players. And I'm sure you recognize a lot of those names. It's huge. And in terms of game developers, you're probably not going to be working at Aetna or something like that, but there are areas where you can work in this space. Patient individuals, so it's for people wanting to use an app for, say, an outcome or improving something. And then there's kind of looping back to the healthcare providers, with the doctors. Say you're trying to deal with a condition like type 2 diabetes, or you want to get into meditation, lifestyle change. There's an app for that. Calm has raised $250 million, and they're hiring for all these kind of roles. It's obviously heavy on the engineering side, but UI, UX, all those kind of things are there too. And then other companies like Achille Interactive, they're creating these digital medicines to help people's lives with cognitive impairment challenges, and they've got open roles. So there's ways to work in games that are apps that aren't your traditional apps in terms of pure entertainment, but are trying to solve a need or help someone in some way. Here's the one I'm most excited about. Video games for doctors. So this is Level X. I think it's really exciting. I joined the company when there was a little over a dozen of us about 2.5 years ago. And, with a few contractors, I think our headcount is closing in on 90 here in the near future, in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We're growing like crazy. And we recently were awarded a grant to work with NASA. NASA has this program called TRISH, and I've got a quick video here. I'll show you about it. And it's about helping doctors, helping astronauts in space when you're in microgravity dealing with medical conditions and situations. Because when you're in space, your body is totally different. Gravity's not there to be pulling blood through your heart, and all kinds of things change. So astronauts need to know ways to deal with that in those situations. And let me see if I can get the video to run here.
So we definitely see the video, but we won't be able to hear the audio, John.
Okay. All right. That's good to know.
Yeah. Unless you put your speaker.
All right. I'll pull back. And I'm sure this will be shared so people can click on the links and stuff.
Yeah. But you can at least talk through it. Like, what are we seeing? And visually, it'd be kind of interesting kind of see what you guys are doing.
Okay, we're back.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
So in terms of the company, let's make sure I'm going to kill this. Make sure we're not. There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're still on. Yep.
Video games for doctors. We are not serious games or gamification. We use advanced game technologies in service of fun, challenging, well-designed gameplay. We have over 500,000 downloads and across 4 different games on iOS and Android. And our team comes from who's who in the game industry. EA, Activision, LucasArts, Backflip, Zynga, Telltale, all kinds of places. I am hiring for all kinds of roles: senior designer, senior programmers, graphics, physics, UI, UX, all kinds of things. Our approach: compelling challenges, build the tech, play test, amplify what's fun. Programmers are involved with real-time graphics, soft body dynamics, fluid simulation, all while optimized for mobile and making these kind of dynamic world environments. Our game design uses navigation, hidden object, first-person shooter, physics, and the idea being to create, accurate, exciting games that maybe mix genres with exciting and deep replayability factor. And artists are on the cutting edge: ZBrush, Substance Designer, Unity, and Houdini. Substance Designer is critical for dialing in those visual representations and working with doctors, and optimization on ZBrush for modifying medical data is important. Here again are the roles I'm hiring for. And here's some of my closing connection information. So you can email me directly at john@levelx.com. Again, the podcast is at info@gamedevadvice.com. I've got the Twitter handles there. Check out the website, levelx with a dash /careers, and then Game Dev Advice. And I'm going to have a shout out to Mark Murphy at Ringling and Chris at Duraga, who shared some information that kind of helped me with this presentation.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for that. This is a topic that I feel I always hint at when we are doing the podcast. So this is the Q&A portion. Yes, we do hear you. Do you hear me? You do hear me, right? You hear me just fine? Oh, no audio. Let me check.
Yeah, can you hear me? I can't hear anything.
I can hear you. So this is part of the live thing. So Ian, do you hear me?
I see it. Does that mean okay? I can't hear anything.
Oh, no worries. One second. As I check my Twitch chat. All right. So my audience hears me, but they are, for some reason, it's not connecting to you. So I'm going to do some troubleshooting a bit and kind of get that. So I'll Discord chat. Let's see if I get you somewhere. So this is actually a perfect time for anyone that needs to ask the question. So I will be scavenging through Twitch, through Facebook, to Twitter, wherever you guys are. Just ask the questions. We have moderators there to talk with you guys. So we're gonna gauge these questions towards John. As soon as he gets back, he's gonna reconnect real quick, and I think the fielding the question directly, this is a perfect opportunity. This is something I always hint about to a lot of you guys out there, that there is a huge amount of there's a huge world outside of games that uses game tools specifically to kind of promote. So let me see if I hear John. Do you hear me, John? Do you hear me just fine? So, all right. So he's gonna do the. I'm going to mute him real quick. So this is part of the fun, yes. I hear you. Do you hear me? No. All right. Let me do some troubleshooting on this side, because I definitely have a lot of questions that I want to talk to him about. And all right. You got it? It was disconnected.
That video might have... obviously caused some issues. Were you able to hear anything after the video played?
Yeah, we heard everything. So people were able to hear me and hear the fussing, but now is actually the perfect time. Great. we can go ahead and go about it. All right. So this is a topic that I always am very interested in, because this is a blossoming thing that I felt the last 2-3 years, that the people who are on the bleeding edge of using game tools outside of game development are at least moving over to other companies. And can you kind of remind us again, how long has it been that you've been spending in this space, just to give an idea?
Yeah, 2.5 years. So I came over from Zynga to Level X as the executive producer and shipped our game Gastro EX, which is for GI doctors. And I've seen firsthand just how this industry is growing. Just knowing that the tools are, like you said, really cutting edge, right? We're doing all kinds of things, especially on mobile, that it has to be optimized and be very realistic, but also fun. Because, at the end of the day, it has to be about fun, because if it's not engaging, doctors and physicians don't play it. So you got to make it fun. And I've learned a lot just seeing, even in the simulation space too, learning about trade shows and how big some of those. Yeah, there's a whole world out there, and I think it was about a year ago I was on your podcast when we talked about the industry outside of traditional gaming, and yeah, it is a growing field. And again, I spent 28 years in more traditional gaming, although the gambling might fit outside of that. But yeah, it's exciting.
So since the transition, maybe your first year, what was the most surprising thing that you discovered with this industry? Because it feels like not exactly kind of an open secret, right? Not a lot of developers are aware. They're kind of tunnel vision with the game project that they're working on. And if they are thinking of shifting or leaving, they are looking at primarily at game companies, and not exactly and there's kind of like a disconnect. I'm sure, like you recruiting talent for Level X and stuff, you're seeing this a lot. Not a lot of developers know firsthand where to apply, and thankfully you're from the industry, so you have connections, but most of these companies don't have that networking ability to kind of reach out to the right people. And so there's kind of like no bridge between the talent and the people who needs the talent. From what I've seen the last year and a half. Can you kind of speak on this?
Yeah, the bridge I see happening a lot, with conferences and things. So we're very active at GDC, and we give talks, and people are like, "Wow, I had no idea that you guys are out there." SIGGRAPH, the last 2 years we presented at SIGGRAPH, won third place in 2018 and second place last year. And we're presenting with people like Digital Domain and Unity and Lucas and stuff like that. So we're spreading the word. I think it's starting to resonate. For some people, they're really excited about the technical challenges and the technical prowess and how they can use their skills technically. So it's like a different avenue for using those technical skills. Other people are excited about the game design, right? Because it's kind of a little bit more of the Wild West. Our VP of game design, John Whitmore, kind of talked about 15 years in console, 10 years in mobile, and now he feels like he's back kind of in the early days of that, because we're learning this as we go along and doing new and different things, instead of kind of turning the crank and just upping the graphics like you do in the normal game industry. So there are people that are learning about it and being attracted to it. And also, I think it depends on the person, but for some people, there's that intrinsic value of like, I'm making a game, I'm working on content that helps doctors, and doctors help patients. So like I'm, indirectly helping up to millions of people based on, doctors seeing a couple thousand patients a year and, having 500,000 downloads. So there's that sense of a reward that you get knowing that you're helping people, and it's not just for pure entertainment. But again, it's different for different people. Some people just love the gameplay challenges of trying to figure out how to do that, different genres and mixing things, and the technical and on the art side. But it is growing, and I think it's going to continue to grow, because there is no shortage of need in the healthcare space and other areas.
So kind of just a individual gauge, right? So the last 2 years, from year one to year two, it seems like there's more awareness, more growth, as you're saying. Like, what would you say percentage wise, or at least key differences when you do approach someone at GDC about this? Their knowledge about it is there, or their interest is there, where you don't have to sell it as much. What is the difference?
Yeah, I think it's really about, it's not gamification, right? And it's not uh, simulation in the sense that it's boring, right? It's, I think there's a stigma, like maybe people be like, oh, it's, because they think of kind of the stuff that's out there that maybe is not being done by people in the game space that are on the cutting edge. So, I've been to some conferences where stuff looks like Half-Life, right? I'm like, these companies maybe aren't current with things. So there is that stigma. But when they see the visuals and they see the design challenges that we have, and they see the tools we use, they're like, wow, this is, the same stuff you do in traditional gaming, but it's just for a different audience, and it's for doctors. And again, it's about fun, right? If it's not fun, they hit the home button, and if 5,000 other apps on their phone. So I think if you make it fun, and let people know that's what we focus on, is fun. It's not just doing dry simulation or gamification things, but making it really exciting. I think part of the transition too was learning the medical angle of it, right? Because when I came in working on gastro, I didn't know anything about gastro, and I learned about different types of polyps, and we have an actual medical team that's embedded with the game team that does research and finds visual references and gets us ideas for cases for different types of gameplay, and just learning about medical, and then thinking, all right, how can we apply that to these different types of mechanics, and how can we make that look really realistic on mobile, running at frame rate and all those kind of things. But I think the angle with learning from mobile has been really exciting. Excuse me, learning from medical has been really exciting. Just trying to figure out how that mixes into this big mashup between state-of-the-art graphics, gameplay, and medical, creating fun, compelling content.
And I would like to kind of explore the client side of things. So doctors, of course, haven't been exposed to this industry. I think a lot of these enterprises, these verticals, kind of did the same where the last 10 years of game development, not at all, completely ignored it. And until graphic fidelity reached a point where it was on par with pre-render content, where they're like, whoa, all right, time to pay attention. So when you're working with doctors or presenting this new world to them of how to educate and how to apply and practice basically their craft, what kind of responses do you usually get with interfacing with people who have no idea where games are nowadays?
Yeah. I think they get really excited about it, and it kind of depends on the subsection of the audience, with doctors, because some of them may never have been exposed to any of this, right? We did a VR experience for gastro where you're standing in a giant colon, and they were maybe had tried VR before, and now they're in this little sandbox environment, and they're pulling polyps, and one of them triggers a blood rupture with a vessel underneath it, and you have to cauterize it with a APC gun, which is kind of like a lightsaber, and they just get really drawn into it. Other people, the medical professional, they grew up playing games. We do a lot of play tests with doctors, and they talk about playing Call of Duty and things like that, maybe as a way for entertainment, stress relief. So they're familiar where the technology is and where the graphics and the fidelity are, but not just in their world. And they get really excited, right? Because you think about it, your life of a doctor or surgeon has been focused on this pursuit, say cardiologist. So you've been studying and learning and building your whole life around that, and now you have this app that you can play that speaks to that, right? So it feels very custom to them, and they feel very grateful to be honest, like wow, I can like pull this out of my pocket. I've got 10, 15 minutes. I can learn about this, type of monitor that Philips has that lets you see where there's blockage for placing stents at a better level of, say, granularity. So I can be better at placing stents, and I learn about this new type of technology from Philips, with a device in my phone, a game on my phone in my pocket, and I think they're embracing it, and that's why we've hit 500,000 downloads across 4 games on iOS and Android.
And what are, I don't know if you have the exact data, maybe we don't need it, but what is the general impression? Because from little that I know, and I think we kind of talked about this the last time we talked on the podcast, doctors or surgeons, usually their first hands-on is on a patient or something like that, right? Am I getting that fact wrong? Like, how do they used to practice before apps or any simulations?
Yeah, it was primarily on cadavers, and sometimes in some cases there'll be a new device or something that there'll be a rep from the company in the operating room with them the first time they're using it. To think of it that way. So now instead of having to do it that way, they can practice on a phone and get more familiar with it. So they're more comfortable with it. They understand how it works more, and they understand the challenges. And it also gives them like an environment to, experiment in a safe way. But back to the question on the first time, yeah, sometimes it is actually, in an operating setting with somebody from that company, and they're getting that training with that representative. And we're here to kind of bridge that gap and give them those tools before they get in that situation, and learn about them and have fun.
One thing that most game developers or people viewing or listening don't realize how big these verticals are in it by itself, right? So we're talking about the game industry, making games using game tools, right? You got to think about also the medical industry, and within that there are different sectors of medical fields that can use game tools and apply it and actually get practice out of it. But there's also pretty much every industry that you can think of out there that has some type of training tool or need can make use of virtual reality. And then I think one of the big thing about VR that people dismiss is that they think it's a complete failure. And it is in a way where it's slowly on a consumer level, not picking up as fast as we want to on an entertainment level. But there are companies that are using it as a training device or other practical needs that are using game tools, but not for pure entertainment, that people don't really think about. And it's only the last few years that the savvy ones, such as yourself and some others, are taking notice and are shifting gears and kind of escaping what's happening with the game industry. Because I think we can pretty much, I can pretty much speak to this. The last 2 years that you left the game industry, things are pretty much the same. We're mostly dependent on game sales. And if anything, it's gotten harder. The saturated market makes it a lot tougher to stand out, but also we're in a weird period where on a personal level, and we were just talking about this yesterday in our roundtable, where I have games that I own that would take up my next 2 years of my life if I just spent the whole day on it, let alone buying new games, which is constantly on the daily being thrown at me with thousands of new games that I probably would be interested in. But how do we circumvent that problem as a gamer, as a game developer? It's causing a lot of chicken or the egg problem, right? So taking a step back, my question to you, this is a long-winded way to ask this question, is like, what have you noticed? I don't know if you still keep up with us, but what are you?
Definitely.
All right, what are you seeing from that other side of the field?
Well, being in this space, looking back at traditional gaming, it's that arms war, right? So it is just, the budgets keep getting higher, the break evens keep getting higher, and it just, when does it end, right? It just seems like it's harder and harder for companies to make that money back unless they're, a Madden or a Red Dead or something like that. So yeah, I kind of look at that and like, wow, it's just there's going to be less and less players unless they go in this, the indie route or smaller. But it's those mid-sized companies are just getting squeezed. I saw that firsthand at Midway. And then in terms of our space, our CEO was at a conference once, and it was kind of, they were talking about like, who's in VR, right? And all these people there, raise their hand, and it's like, who's making money in VR? And hardly anybody's hands was up, when that question was asked. Enterprise is making money in VR, right? That's the vertical that is making money, and we've developed trade show experiences that are in VR or MR also now with the Magic Leap, and there is money in that space that there isn't in the consumer space, because it's still, especially for the cutting edge VR, it still feels very hobbyist in some ways. With the Vive, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You plug it back in, you have to have a $4,000 computer. There's all these barriers of entry. Although I know like the PlayStation VR is kind of removing that, where it just hasn't been embraced in that way that I think everyone thought they would be making all this money. Whereas, outside of traditional gaming, there is money being made in the XR space. And I can say that with certainty.
So as you're in these conventions and kind of open the doors for a lot of us to finally realize the potential of different industries, I'm imagining you're rubbing a lot of shoulders with other recruiters, producers from other industries. And what kind of the issues are they having? Is it just purely just looking for more talent? Because we're in a converting stage, I imagine. It's like a lot of it's like educating talent about these industries, but also there's a lot of changing of workflow. Not really, right? I in a way, it's a changing of mindset. It's like, hey, it's going to be a stable job, right? You're not have to worry or crunch. There's a lot of languages there that if I have PTSD from work, it's like, what are you saying to me? So like, what are other verticals and all these other people from the other side, outside the medical field, saying? Are they sharing the same worries and concerns? Yeah.
Well, I've had some more exposure recently in the simulation space, because we do some recruiting there, obviously for the NASA Trish project, and it seems like people get burned out from the crunch and the grind, and then they go in the simulation space, and then it's a more 9 to 5 type role, but it's not as exciting, so they kind of miss that adrenaline rush, maybe seeing the commercial for the game on TV, that they work on and stuff. And then they flip back and go to the traditional entertainment gaming. So there's a push-pull kind of thing goes there, where sometimes the simulation space pulls them out of traditional gaming, and then they have them for a while, and then they go back. I can speak firsthand. There's an experience where we have a really talented UX designer that was in our space at our company, and he spent some time and helped us ship a game, Cardio X, which is phenomenal, especially in the UX. And he had a brief period where he thought, you know what, I really miss that console experience, working on that AAA game, the game that you see on TV, the commercial for that everybody talks about. He left the company, and 6 weeks later, he was like, you know what, I went back. And he actually changed his mind and came back to work for us, because he realized he missed some of those challenges that we deal with, and he realized it was going to be doing the same old thing again, and just the reward from having that high profile game wasn't enough to stay in the industry, and that's why he came back from the traditional gaming to our studio, doing this kind of new area of types of gaming. So if that answers your question, but the industry itself pulls from different areas, and there's a need for a lot more excitement in the medical space. The trade shows are nothing like E3. So when you come in with something cool and it's XR based, people get really excited. And yeah, there's a lot of growth opportunity in these different verticals.
Yeah, it'd be kind of funny that these doctor conventions are as big as E3.
It was at I went to DDW, and it was at McCormick Place, which that's where the auto show is in Chicago. So it's billions and billions of dollars a year are spent on these conventions, and it's a huge industry. And but yeah, it's different than E3. It's more conservative, right? Putt golf, hot dog carts, and baristas, and it's not as exciting as the game industry. So when we show up with VR and you got blood shooting out and APC lightsaber light devices, people get really excited, and that resonates with those companies because they see as a great way to get people excited about their products.
Yeah, I mean, this comes with age and other responsibilities too. Like the last two and a half days, we've had speakers on, and anybody that have gotten to that level where they worked on the dream project that they want to work on, at least on a personal level, what I found was I felt very unfulfilled. And I went through a couple of those cycles where it's like, oh, maybe because I need to work on the other franchise that I would want to work on. And it got less and less exciting on launch day. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until like 3-5 years ago where I started to boil down the importance. I love working on projects, but it became less on, it became more about control of what I put out. And within a big environment, within other companies, no matter how high you climb, you really don't have that much control over the final product, right? You just have a room full of leads at most, but even then you have 300 plus members on your team that should have an equal say, and it becomes less and less your baby, right? So what I have found salvation in is in these different industries outside of a game, using game tools. I really do see it as a very mature step in your career as a game developer to move on towards, because at that stage you have a wife and family, or a husband, basically a family to support, that you want stability, that you want less weight into the final sales of a product, because that is always a variable. No matter how much you spend millions on, that's not yours. A company that have been putting like the 5th or 6th game of that franchise still is praying that game does well, right? There is no winning formula, and I think with the market being saturated and stuff, I don't feel like that problem's ever going to go away. It's going to get worse. And I'm so glad that these different industries are happening. Can you kind of speak on your theory on why exactly there has been sort of like a trigger for these industries in the last 2 years? I have a personal thinking on it, but I want to hear your thoughts on how this came to be all of a sudden, that it's growing.
Yeah, the tools are there now, and the tools can just move over from traditional gaming. So again, we're in Unity. We use Maya, use all the different Perforce, all the different kind of things that you use, in the traditional space. And there is those opportunities that are out there now where you can just apply those talents that you have in a more meaningful way, or in a more challenging way technically. I think in some cases people have kind of been to the top of the mountain, and then now what's next? Kind of to your point, right? Like I'd worked on the number 1 game in the country, and I was kind of like, okay, and what's next? What's next? And now they're asking themselves that more, and they're seeing this industry, they're seeing our company, they're seeing these other areas where they can have a bigger contribution, where it's not 3 or 4 or 500 people spread all throughout the world, and it's at the whim of how marketing spends the money to see if their game is a success and if they have a job or not. But you're in more control of your own destiny, a lot of times at these companies, and you have more input and more say, and I think that's what's exciting, and that's what's attracting people, is that it gets more to the heart of game development, and you see the results, and you're not so much a cog, in the machine. And again, it's cutting edge, and you're doing all that cool tech stuff. A lot of times, again, back, not to harp in the past, but it was a lot about gamification and edutainment, and again, a lot of that stuff is crap, right? So people would see that and be like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to. I'm a craftsman. I don't want to. I'm a craftsperson. I don't want to be part of that. But then when they see stuff being high fidelity visual graphics and fun gameplay, they're like, okay, I can see my skills being applied, in that space. And then they start to get attracted to it. And then they make that transition. And I think that's why we've grown so fast, and why we've had so much success, is just that combination of doing all those different kind of things and being able to do all those technical challenges and gameplay challenges, and being on the cutting edge with art, and figuring out ways to help people. And a lot of our company is young. I'm one of the second or third oldest person in the whole company, so it's not a lot of people at the later stage of their careers. People at all stages of their career. We've hired people straight out of DePaul with a master's program that just came in and just done fantastic work. So I think it's people looking for different options, different alternatives, and also wanting a little bit better of a life balance. So maybe they can work on their own game outside of work. A lot of these big companies, the big media companies, are run by lawyers, and the lawyers say you can't work on games outside of work, and you can't have games published outside of your role here. Companies like ours embrace that. We're like, hey, more power to you, right? If you want to get better in Unity, if you want to get better using ZBrush, and do it on your own time, that's fine. And then bring those skills to work, and everyone's cool with that. So I think it's about work-life balance, having those different kind of opportunities to solve, both technical and design wise, and just thinking about holistically about what your work does and how it contributes to society. If you want to even get a little deeper, but which kind of resonated with me as part of the reason. But there's different answers for different people. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
I mean, it's definitely a big sell that you're saving lives now with game tools.
Yeah.
But
or for good.
Yeah. But I like that you're touching upon a point that two things, right? So these game companies that are kind of pushing the developers to a breaking point, and aside from that, you're interfacing with a lot of professionals that we wouldn't normally interface with. So you're talking about you have a medical team that helps with research and stuff. How has that interaction been? Because you're at the same time, well, I'm sure like game developers kind of take over a workplace where you're like, oh, right, it's like a game studio again. But then there's like that great hybrid with other professionals that are way smarter than we are. And then where you're like talking across the table to them about things that actually matter. So, I mean, it's a different day-to-day life that I think that most developers would embrace, but something that is kind of unusual, right?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting, right? Because you're involved with medical people, and you learn about stuff, and you're like, oh wow, that's what goes on when you have a colonoscopy. I didn't know that, and that's now I know more about that, and then you figure out ways to make gameplay around that, and other areas around medical, and it's this weird dance between medical and design, because you need to make things fun and they need to be medically accurate. So um, it's fun in the sense that you're trying to figure out where that line is, and then you play test and you get feedback and you learn because at the end of the day, I'm not a cardiologist, so my opinion doesn't matter as much by any stretch as a cardiologist. So we put the games throughout development in front of cardiologists or whatever the specialty is, so that they can learn and we can get their feedback, I should say. But I think it's really fun just having medical. They sit right with the game team, right? So they're just like another artist or designer or programmer, and they're doing spreadsheets and maybe have different things up for reference, but they're in the meetings and they're kind of rolled in with the team. And it's cool too when you hear how that mashup happens. I remember there was one of our designers had been about 6 weeks at the company, and I heard him talking about the game Cardio X, and he's talking about this, and we have to do the stint into that. And I just kind of looked at him like, dude, you sound like a doctor, because it was like he had to embrace that subject matter. So he dove into it to really understand it, and then to learn about it, and then to figure out how to come up with cool content, fun gameplay, compelling mechanics, using that medical information. So you kind of embrace that medical angle and figure out ways to reshape it and make it fun. And it's cool to learn about medical stuff, right? It's our medical people, biomedical engineers, they talk about, dissecting cadavers in school and, all the kind of crazy stuff that they know. So it's a fun way to learn about stuff that affects all of us, which is health, right?
Yeah, definitely. There is actually something that I just remembered when you were talking about how this has actually gotten more offensive actually in the last few years. It used to be about bigger companies not allowing you to work on games outside of the company that you work for, where at least competitive games, right? A game you can't, if you're working on a first person shooter, you can't work on a first person shooter at home. All right, that kind of makes sense. I understand. And then it's slowly spread out to like, well, you can't really work on anything that is being put out on the same devices. It's like, okay, all right. And then now it's completely, it gotten to the point with a lot of artists friends that I have where you can't work on any personal artwork, just an image rendering if you're a character artist, and because that would be counted as owned by the company, which is kind of insane how pervasive that these lawyers at these big companies are kind of limiting the creative freedom that what creatives are really good at, being creative. And I think what's refreshing is that these other industries recognize the importance of it, and being somewhat non-competitive, it doesn't really even factor in as a problem. I would love to hear more of your thoughts about that, because that's something the last year and a half, I'm interfaced with my friends, and it's gotten so much worse, and it's not at all improving. And it's crazy how it's not illegal to that point where they make you sign a contract before employment.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two angles to it, right? There's the, well, if you got gas in the tank to work on your own stuff, why don't you just crunch more, right? So there's that mentality, which is not healthy and wrong. And then the other one is just, the lawyers are there, and you could have a game that has nothing to do with anything on the game that you're working on, but because it's out there and the lawyers are kind of running the show, you have to pull it down or you can't have it out. And I think that's just wrong, right? People in our industry want to create, right? That's what drives them. That's their passion. That's their juice. And not being able to do that, or having to do it under pseudonyms or other kind of stuff, I think is just wrong. And it just kind of shows how some of these companies, the power they have, and how the lawyers are in control, and it's not right. And we openly encourage people to work on stuff outside of work. We've had a couple of our people have game of the day on the App Store for their personal game, and they work with us during the day. And if you look level 80, or is it 80 level, Ryan Blake, who's our art director, had all this amazing 3D modeling done for this kind of retro space stuff he had done on the side. And, guess what? He's getting better at ZBrush. He's getting better at his craft, at his skill doing that. So why would you not embrace that? Because that, translates back to your day-to-day work. It makes you better in that space also. And it's just lawyers that don't understand game development calling the shots. It's wrong. There used to be a joke at Midway. The CEO would say, "I own your dreams." And I think he was only half kidding, and so it's been like that for a while. But it's traditionally the big media companies. So those are the ones, the big companies that have the rooms full of lawyers. They have to justify their lawyering. That's a word. And yeah, it's just wrong. People should be able to work on games outside of work, especially if it's nothing related to what the games that they're working on are.
And this is something I've noticed too. Like later in my career, I consciously made the move into smaller teams, mobile development, just outside of AAA, right? And what I've noticed, especially on the smaller teams, like there's a mix of the veterans who have escaped, right, that been through it and are happy, and for actual weight in staying in the boardroom, right, making decisions that actually matter. And then there's the mix of the young talent that are eager to get to where those resumes were and are just finding this as a step to get to that. And there's a constant reminder of like, hey, you have no idea how good you have it right now. Like, but there is just no way of convincing these young talent of like, unless they go through it themselves, that you can only share so many stories and share so many war scars, before they're like, yeah, you're burnt out, you're just saying this and that. So what is your advice? Let's say you were to sit down, and I'm sure you run into this all the time, especially with the young talent. It's like, oh, but I want to work on the next Call of Duty, Call of Battlefield. It's like, it's not as good as it sounds, but good luck. What do you usually say to these guys?
Yeah, it's sometimes they just have to experience it themselves, right? And I tell them like it's not as great as you think it is. And my friend said he had a quote like, what had the quote where like it's fun to drive a Ferrari, but it's not fun to make it sometimes, right? But they have that vision of their head of speeding down the road, and they don't understand what goes into the, as we call it in the industry, it's kind of gross, but just making the sausage, right? What's actually going into that, and they don't understand the late nights and the sleep deprivation and the futons and all that kind of stuff that go into it. So you try and point them in the right direction. You tell them to Google things, right? If you look up EA Spouse, they came out in, what was it, 2002, 2004, and it kind of talked about the dark side, with the crunch and things, up until more recent stuff going on. And it's out there, but you just have to experience it. Like myself, I would get every 10 years, I quit the industry, and I would just be like, that's it, I'm done, I'm out. And it's like Godfather 2. I get out and they pull me back in, and it's like, you doing what? What are you working on? Oh shit. All right. Maybe I'll talk to you about that. And I would get back in it again. And then I'd be like, why am I doing this? So I went through myself multiple cycles like that until I just said, that's enough. And there's got to be better ways to, make games without killing yourself, but also that are fun and that have value. And it's not just point and click and boring gamification stuff, but it's actually compelling, fun content. So, I don't know. People have to either learn it themselves or just hear from enough veterans like ourselves and read enough websites and blogs to know that maybe I don't want to get into that. And I do think there is a bit more of a mind shift happening over the last decade, where people are less prone to be like, put up, how should I say, to put up with that. Maybe they're like, no, I don't want to make those sacrifices to my health and my life. I want to have a life outside of work. So they're more open to ideas of working in different spaces in the game industry that don't expect that, because, back when I got in it, it was just that's just the way it is. It was just part of the deal. It's like you go through the boot camp of QA, and can you survive the gauntlet, and can you make it to the next tier? And, until one day you go, where's this all going? What's the value in this? What does this mean at the end? So I say, come work with us.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you there. There's definitely more awareness, and I feel with Level X and other industries outside of games, more options that's slowly building. I feel like there's maybe another, you probably have a better gauge in this, but like a year or two where you can start seeing these type of job postings and be familiar with it to kind of recruit talent and actually have options outside of the traditional game development companies. I see that fastly becoming the trend, because like you said, these industries are in need of talent and have lots of money. So it's only a matter of time where the conversion happens, if not already. Right. Yeah, it's the apex will happen. So John, maybe this is a great time to kind of throw back your closing connection slide so that people can find you.
Great.
But I'm going to hand the mic over to you, and just as a send off, people who are interested, how can they find your company? How they can find you? How they get connected to you?
Cool. I'm going to go back to share the screen here. And
there we go.
Can you see that?
Yes. All right. Here we go. Bam.
Yeah. There we go. John at level-ex.com. That's my email. And info@gamedevadvice.com. That's the website, that's the email for my podcast. Twitter's Level X Game Dev or Game Dev _advice. The careers page, you can just go to Level X, click on careers. It's right in the middle of doing an update, so it should be a newer version coming out pretty quick. But yeah, go to the careers page, check out all the roles, click on the link, see if you're a fit for one of the roles. And then the podcast, if you go to the website, there are links to all the platforms you can listen to, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the usual suspects. And yeah, it's just a fun one-on-one conversation I have with people in the industry, usually friends of mine, kind of telling the war stories. Often the stories talking about crunch. But I think people should just really check out the website for levelx.com, because there is a lot of exciting things that we're doing. We're getting into new genres. We're pushing the boundaries with medical and gaming, and really attracting the best of the best. About 20% of our studio has relocated to Chicago from various places, and I'm hiring. So check it out. Think outside the box. Try something different.